Welcome, everyone. I'm Jackie, and today I'm interviewing Foster about his experience living in several different countries, his unexpected career path, and so much more. To get the full experience, you can answer the questions yourself and do the homework assignment that we give at the end of each episode. Also, on our website, you can access worksheets that go with each episode. These worksheets have the transcript of our conversation with pronunciation tips, important expressions, vocabulary. So if you want to access these worksheets, just click on the link in our show notes and let's jump right into the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Improve Your English, Improve Your Life. Today, we're going to get to know Foster a little bit better. So I'm going to interview Foster, and you guys are going to learn a little bit of his life story in about 20 minutes or less. And so, Foster, let's get to know you.
Okay. Hello, sweet people. What would you like to know, Jackie?
Oh, all kinds of good things. But first, I would like you to tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up in Brazil, and also how you ended up in Portugal, which is where you are now.
Okay. A condensed version of my background and my experiences. So I am originally from South Carolina, a very small state in the southeast of the U.S. And I went to university in Tennessee, where I really studied Spanish. Anyways, after university, I did a lot of different things. I taught English in Spain in a bilingual public elementary school for a couple of years. I worked in a nonprofit in New York and also in Guatemala. And eventually, I decided it would be a good idea to get an international master's of business administration, an international MBA. And part of that program was you were required to learn a new language and study abroad for a year. So the area of the program that I was in, you had to move to Rio for a year. And that was my introduction to Brazil and to
cool.
Portuguese.
So you could not go to a Spanish-speaking country, for example. It had to be a new language for you.
It was highly encouraged. So they did have like a track for Spanish speakers where you could study in Mexico. But because I already spoke Spanish quite well and Rio just sounded really cool to me, I decided, why not? Let's go to Brazil.
Yeah, have a little extra challenge and learn another language. And one thing I'm curious about, Foster, because I also learned Spanish before Portuguese. How is your Spanish now? Do you mix the two a lot? Do you feel like you've forgotten everything?
This is an audio program, but if you could see me, I am shaking my head no. My Spanish is not good at the moment. When I speak Spanish, a lot of crazy things happen in my mind. First, I'm obviously mixing it with Portuguese. But I'm also living in Portugal now, and European Portuguese is much more similar to Spanish than Brazilian Portuguese.
Ah, I didn't know that.
At least grammatically, like they use like vosotros and all of those things.
Ah, cool.
So my brain just starts mixing all three of the languages into some language that no one can understand.
It's like your code language. But I totally relate. It's crazy because I think Spanish and Portuguese are so similar. It's really hard to separate the two. And there's times where I've caught myself like really focusing on bringing back the Spanish. And then I feel that it negatively affects my Portuguese. Then I start saying words in Spanish rather than Portuguese. So I think if you speak both languages very, very, very well, you probably won't mix them. But while you're in that process, it's really challenging.
Yeah, it was very beneficial when I was learning Brazilian Portuguese
Yeah.
Like, I think I was conversationally fluent in a few months,
Yeah.
but then I fell in love with Brazil and Brazilian Portuguese, and I kind of forgot about my Spanish.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. And so when you went to Brazil, you were there for like a master's program.
Mhm.
And what made you decide to stay?
So at first, I stayed there for 9 months as part of the master's program, and I was studying and doing kind of an internship at a tech startup. And I actually had to return to the US to finish the program.
Mhm.
And I had a minor existential quarter life crisis where I was receiving a lot of job offers for typical MBA students. Like, I was very, very close to accepting a job at a construction company. I think about that now. Like, it was a lot of money, but I would be like selling construction equipment in the US.
Yeah.
And that just didn't feel good. So I said, I'm going to leave all of that and move back to Rio and just teach English to make money.
Mhm.
And then I met my partner, Alexia, and we started two businesses together and totally changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. No, but it's so crazy when you think back to like other pathways that you could have gone down. For example, the construction job, or I'm sure all of us have had other opportunities or things come up, and you're like, what if I chose that instead of this other choice that I made? And how different would my life be? And I think, especially for people like you and me who moved to another country and got in relationships with other people from other countries and started our own businesses, it's a very drastic life change. And if you think like, had I stayed in South Carolina and taken the construction job and never gone back and never met Alexia, like I'd maybe you'd still be there doing something completely different. It's we never know, but it's always kind of fun to think about how some decisions really take your life in a whole new direction.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if that's like something in my personality, but I've made a lot of those decisions in my life. Like, we decided to move from Brazil to Portugal. That was
Mhm.
another really big decision. But I tend to do that without thinking very much about the consequences. And it always works out okay.
It does. And honestly, I think when we worry too much about the consequences is when we become full of fear and don't ever want to leave. But if you even go through, like, what's the absolute worst case scenario? It doesn't work out and you go back. So it's okay. There's not too much to risk. And it's a learning experience. You got to try out a new country. But yeah, there is some. And I think when you are used to that, like if you've taken enough risks in your life or kind of dove headfirst into different situations and it's been okay, you have more confidence to keep doing that for
Yeah.
sure.
I think I should mention that in my 20s, I really did not have any like responsibilities. I was single. I didn't have any like financial responsibilities. So my thinking really was, what's the worst that can happen? I could always just come back. Nowadays that I'm a little bit older, I have more responsibilities. There are more things to consider. So it is a privileged position to be in, but I
Yes.
still recommend, if you're in your 20s with no strings attached, just make the crazy decision.
Absolutely, because there won't be any better time. And you're young enough that you kind of rebound, I feel like, more quickly, and you're more flexible and more adaptable. So definitely your 20s or even younger if you want, or 30s, whatever. It's always a good time to just test your limits a little bit and see what happens. As long as, like you said, you're not putting your family or other people in tremendous risk.
Yeah. People keep telling me that like the 30s are the new 20s and you make a lot of your best friends in your 30s. I'm 32. And so far, My 30s, it's been going downhill. Like I've had back problems, like my body's falling apart.
I don't know about that advice, but yeah, I mean, we do definitely feel the physical changes as we get older, for sure. But I do think they're also kind of like silent whispers or screams from your body to take better care of yourself.
Yeah.
Sleep more, exercise more, stretch, take care of me. I'm not 18 years old. And then we just have to listen and make those changes.
Yeah. My body stopped whispering years ago, and now it's just constantly screaming, like, get away from your computer screen.
I know.
Stand up, walk.
Yes. But these are all good messages. They're all important messages. We have to listen. I agree. Well, okay. So you and Alexia, you guys started your podcasting business. And what made you guys decide to do a podcast? Because you guys started pretty early, before most people even knew what a podcast was.
Yeah. When we started, Alexia did not know what a podcast was. Honestly, I still don't know how much Alexia really understands what podcasts are, even though she's recorded 1,000 episodes. So we started with a Portuguese teaching podcast called Karaoke Connection.
Mm-hmm.
And really the idea was simply to record Alexia and I having conversations in Portuguese. And it was kind of just a way for me to improve my Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
And like force myself to improve my Portuguese, because we were publicly posting them.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. Like we really enjoyed doing it, but not that many people were listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was in Brazil teaching English, and everyone was asking me to teach English. And there was a lot of demand for Brazilians wanting to learn English.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, we are probably doing this like backwards.
Right.
But then we started another podcast. The name is Inglês no rádio, which is essentially the same thing. Alexia and I having conversations, but this time in English, and I'm teaching Alexia English. And both those podcasts have been strangely successful. They still exist today.
Yeah.
It's been really crazy.
But I think what you guys do, which is unique, like obviously people want to listen to your podcast to improve their English, but they really feel like they're just part of the conversation with the two of you. And the fact that you guys are in a relationship together and you guys post very regularly, like people feel like they really know you and they're kind of following along or being a part of your guys' journey in Brazil, in the US, in Portugal, wherever you guys go. They just feel very close to you guys. And it's not just focused on language learning. You guys talk a lot about other things, life things, which people can relate to. So I think that's a good idea. And what you talked about with your Portuguese recording, as a way for you to improve your Portuguese is a fantastic idea. And I'm sure now if you were to go back and listen to those first recordings, you would notice a tremendous difference. And
I had to do that recently. Yes, because we were editing some old episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is humbling to say the least.
Yeah. But to me, that's a good sign. Like if I go back and watch old videos of mine and I feel like they're my best work, then I have a problem.
Exactly.
It's like you should feel a little bit like cringy, like, oh gosh, this is embarrassing or this is hard to listen to. But that shows that you've improved tremendously since then. So
I do listen to some of our more recent episodes and I think, wow, my Portuguese is still not where it should be. And honestly, that like fuels me and motivates me to start actually studying Portuguese again.
Yes.
Or for the first time.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a great way to look at it, because if you were to look at it like, oh, my Portuguese isn't where it should be. I should just give up. That's obviously not going to help you. But if you look at it like this is a challenge, like there's so much more that I can learn and there's so much more that I can improve on, like that's exciting. It kind of keeps you pushing forward. So another question, Foster, for you. For those people wanting to get into podcasting or English teaching, do you have any advice for them or even like yourself looking back? If you could go back, a few years in time and give yourself some advice about entrepreneurism, language learning, life, anything, what would you say?
Yeah, I think I might have a different answer for each of those areas, depending on if you're talking about entrepreneurship or language learning or podcasting. And also depends who's asking. I imagine most of our listeners are Brazilian.
Mm-hmm.
So in the terms of language learning, can you ask the question in a different way?
We'll focus on language learning because I agree that was a little bit too broad. So if you could go back in time, I know it's like, tell me in 1 minute.
Give me advice about everything.
What should I do with my life, my job, my career, my language? Go. Rephrasing. So we'll focus specifically on language learning. If you could go back to even maybe before you started studying Spanish, because you said you were conversational in Portuguese fairly quickly because of your Spanish knowledge. Are there any, not mistakes, but are there any things that you did that you feel like weren't a good use of your time and other things that you realized later, like, wow, this was incredibly helpful. I wish I had known this earlier or done more of this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that pointed question.
No problem.
Yeah, so I would say it took me a matter of months to become conversationally fluent in Brazilian Portuguese, whereas it took me more than a decade to speak Spanish fluently. So the big lessons I learned, number one, I studied Spanish for like 10 years without ever actually speaking Spanish.
Right.
Which in retrospect, that seems like an obvious, like, yeah, if you want to speak Spanish, you got to speak Spanish.
Right.
And also, I learned Spanish through like the traditional school system, very traditionally, like textbooks, grammar, like learning vocabulary by chapter and things like that. And the way I learned Portuguese was almost the total opposite. I essentially started with conversations and pronunciation. And if I have to give advice to language learners, essentially learning any new language, if you're starting from zero, focus on pronunciation and conversation as soon as possible. And when I say pronunciation, I'm not talking about having a good accent, but actually understanding the phonology of the language. Phonology is this fancy word to say the sound system. Each language is composed of a finite collection of sounds, and some of those sounds probably exist in your native language. Some do not, and they will be very difficult for you. So just getting that out of the way early really expedited the process and allowed me to start speaking earlier. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people put the speaking part for last. They feel like they have to get to a very high level in order to start speaking. People even just starting out can do simple things like listening and repeating, just saying random words and all the words you know in this language. Just say them, practice them, listen to something, and then just copy it, do that shadowing after it. Because a lot of times in our head, we may know a lot, but then when we open our mouth, what comes out is completely different. So we have to have that practice of not just carrying it in our heads, but also putting it into practice. And when you do that, it'll be easier for you to keep doing that in real life situations. And it's just more fun. just like anything, if you want to learn how to play piano, you can learn how to read the music, but you need to actually, put your fingers on the keys and just anything in life. Practice, practice, practice. I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect
That's
advice.
my advice in a concise way. Do not approach language learning as this weird, isolated, esoteric, like knowledge acquisition thing. It's not that. Think about any other cool thing that you've done in your life that took you some time to develop the skills and to really be proficient at it,
Mm-hmm.
and apply the exact same skills to language learning because
Yeah.
it's more or less the same.
Exactly. And I think the advice that you and I give about learning a language applies to learning anything in life, which is really cool. And so another question that I have is, I know you went to school to do your MBA, your master's in business administration. And one thing that I think is a common mistake is I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm getting my MBA in finance, or I'm getting my MBA in another area. But in English, an MBA is a master's in business administration. So you don't get an MBA in another area. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be complicated because
Right.
a lot of MBA programs have like different tracks where you can
Right.
specialize in things. But yeah, talking about education, especially the differences between the educational systems in Brazil and the US,
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing to do. Like I
Right.
recommend keep it very simple.
Yes. Yeah. But there's certain things like that just don't translate perfectly. But what I wanted to ask you is, did you know that you wanted to be like an entrepreneur? Or how did that come about for you?
No, not at all. My dad's an entrepreneur. His
Mhm.
dad was an entrepreneur. Like I definitely come from an entrepreneurially minded family.
Perfect.
Brazilians always say like, nossa, essa palavra é tão difícil, entrepreneur. But it's really difficult
It
for
is.
me as
Yes.
well.
An entrepreneur. Yeah. I don't even know. How would you say it? So I come from an entrepreneur minded
Lovely.
family,
Yeah.
maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. I come from a family of entrepreneurs.
Perfect.
Yeah. Of people that started businesses. No, I never saw myself. I don't know if that's true. Like I had a valet parking business in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I used to like buy shirts on eBay from China and sell them to my friends like
Okay.
at a higher price.
Yeah.
So I definitely had some of that in me, but I was
Mm-hmm.
also and still am like a very shy, introverted person. And I imagine that entrepreneurs are like type A, like great public
Extroverted.
speakers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, it was just a long process of discovering who I am and what I want to do.
Right. But I like what you said about sometimes people have the idea that you need to have a specific personality type in order to be an entrepreneur. Or if you're a little bit more introverted, then you need to be behind the scenes, or, that means you're not confident or things like that. And I remember you told a story about when you were doing your MBA program and you guys did like a personality test.
Oh yeah.
Could you share that story?
Yes. So one of the first days of my master's in business, we did like a personality test. I believe it was called the Berkman method, but it's
Mm-hmm.
one of those personality tests that examines a lot of different parts of your personality. And then it gives you a number, but in this case, it also gives you a color. So I believe they had red, which is like type A, business school, like go get them. Green was more of like a people person, like you would probably be good at like sales and communications. Yellow was more analytical,
Okay.
and blue was like artistic, creative, shy, like, what are you doing in this program? And they had like tape, like colored tape, like fita dupla. And they put this in the gymnasium, and it was like 200 meters long, and they had each color. And I scored a 98 out of 100 on the blue spectrum. So almost as blue as you can get. And they asked each student to stand on the tape, like where they are. And pretty much everybody was in the red section, very far away from me. A few people in the green, maybe one person in the yellow. And I was literally just standing by myself, like day one. Like, oh my gosh, what have I done?
I
What
love
am I
that
doing here?
visual, though. I think that's such an awesome visual. But I think a lot of people can relate to that, feeling that maybe they don't have the right personality or the right profile to do the job because that's what society or their teachers or their parents or people have told them. Like, no, you need to be this type in order to do this job. But it's not true. It's not true. And obviously you're proof of that, because even though you were in the blue zone, you've created several businesses on your own. So everyone can kind of put their own stamp on things and do things their way.
Yeah.
But you did learn a lot from that as well. You probably learned that, you know, your style is not like this aggressive, extroverted, pushy sales type of style. It's a more
Yeah,
laid
no,
back.
when I think about it now, I believe, as far as I know, I'm the only person from my graduating class of business school that actually became an entrepreneur.
Wow.
Everyone else like works for big companies and
Yeah.
makes a lot more money than I do. But yeah, maybe that weirdness and creativity and introversion kind of worked to my advantage in some ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Awesome, Foster. Okay. Last question here. I know we want to end each episode giving the listeners a homework assignment, but I'm going to try to be specific here and not say give a general homework assignment.
Okay.
So to those people that are listening that maybe want to start their own business or want to get started in something, what would be like a really easy initial step for them to just maybe figure out where to go? Or like, what's a question or a couple questions that they could ask themselves just to get a little bit more clarity on which direction they should go in?
That is a very good question. That's a difficult question. So I receive a lot of variations of this question. Like, hey, I have an idea for a business. What do you think about it? But the most common characteristic is I haven't started a business, and what they're really asking me is like, hey, tell me this is a good idea so I have permission to go start it.
Right.
And honestly, no one's ever going to give you permission.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would really recommend, think about what is the smallest thing you can do publicly. And like the smallest, fastest thing, like in business language, we would call this the MVP, minimum viable product. So if you are an illustrator, like publish one of your illustrations online. If you're a podcaster, publish one episode. And just putting a little bit of work out there, that really just, it's like a perspective shift where you have the mindset of, okay, this is not scary. And then you start receiving feedback and people can tell you if they like it or not. But yeah, the fear of starting it's always the biggest one. So just do something
Exactly.
small.
I love that. It actually reminds me of the Martin Luther King quote. He says, you don't have to see the entire staircase. You just have to take the first step. And that's so true, because sometimes people think they have to know, they have to have their whole plan, their whole business plan, you know, everything mapped out so that they can easily follow it. But at least in my own experience, it's never happened that way. It's like you said, what's one tiny step that I can take? Okay, I did that step. What's the next one? What's the next one? And then you just, throughout that journey, you stop and reflect and reevaluate. Am I going in the right direction? Do I need to change course? And eventually, just taking one tiny step after the other, you end up going to places you never even imagined. But that first step is the hardest for sure. So I love that advice.
Yeah.
Awesome, Foster.
I cannot say it better than Martin Luther King.
Me neither. That's why I'll just steal his quote. All right, Foster. Well, thank you so much for letting us into your life, into your mind a little bit more. Those of you guys listening, you guys can even answer these questions yourselves. Imagine that, we're asking you these same questions, and how would you answer these questions? And also don't forget to do your homework assignment. What is that one tiny step that you can take?
Yeah, do it. Send it to us.
Yes. Yeah. Let us know.
Cool. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Improve Your English, Improve Your Life. It really is something very special that you are listening. It's amazing. So if you like what we do and you want to learn even more, you can receive free access to all of the homework assignments, worksheets, transcriptions, and a lot more resources on our website. Again, thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.